Welcome to The Hidden Load, the podcast where we uncover the unseen weight carried by the educators and leaders in medicine and explore how to lighten it. I am Dr. Santina Wheat. I am a family physician, an educator, a leader, and a coach. Each week, we will dig into the challenges that often go unspoken, from burnout and boundaries to purpose and identity to figuring out sustainability, and share practical tools to help you move from chaos to calm and from burnout to balance. Because the hidden load does not have to be yours to carry alone, and in fact, shouldn't be. Let's get started. Welcome back to The Hidden Load. This is episode number 19, Trauma-Informed Care for Physicians, Why Educators and Leaders Must Pay Attention. I am your host, Dr. Santina Wheat. I'm a family physician, an educator, and a career and life coach who is dedicated to helping healthcare workers conquer their chaos and get back to calm. And today's episode is one I think that every physician and healthcare worker, especially those of us who educate, mentor, and lead others, needs to hear. Today, I'm honored to welcome Dr. Cynthia Chen-Joea. She is a double board certified family and obesity medicine physician, a certified career and life coach, and the founder and CEO of Thrivation. Her work focuses on physician well-being, trauma-informed care, and also building sustainable medical careers without leaving medicine behind. I love that, and I'm right there with you. She practices clinically in Southern California, serves as the medical director of Copa de Oro Medical Group, and is the inpatient director for the Charles R. Drew University Family Medicine Residency Program. She also holds leadership roles at the local, state, and national levels. What I appreciate most about Cynthia's work is that it's deeply grounded in lived experience as a woman, as a mother, and as a physician navigating modern medicine. And so today we are talking about trauma-informed care for physicians, why it matters, how it shows up in real life, and why educators and leaders in medicine can't afford to ignore it. Cynthia, welcome. I am so glad that you're here today.
Thank you so much. I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, now that you're here, I always like to start these conversations with your hidden load. Because when we talk about burnout or well-being, we often skip over those things that we carry quietly without language or validation, which is what I term the hidden load. When you think about your own career, how would you describe the hidden load that you were carrying?
For me, I think so much of it has to do with expectations. So, this constant internal struggle and feeling like I wasn't living up to anyone else's expectation and certainly not my own. And the belief that if I didn't live up to all of those, I wasn't holding everything together. And one of my deep core beliefs is that just because if I can't do that, I'm not good enough. And I think as physicians, we just have incredibly high expectations of ourselves and potentially of other people. And so for me, it wasn't just like I was responsible for clinical decisions. I felt like I was responsible for everyone else's experience, for everyone's outcome, for patient outcome, for resident learning, for like the consequence of systemic demands on our learners or our faculty. And I think that's just a lot of pressure and responsibility to take on to one person, to make sure that everyone is happy, everyone is satisfied, and nobody was disappointed. So I think, what made it heavy wasn't the work in and of itself. It was the meaning that we attached to the work. And so, we're trained so early as physicians to equate usefulness to worth and validation. And so I think that hidden low becomes if I'm not making everyone happy, if I'm not perfect, I'm not doing enough. And then I'm failing. And I think in the medical culture, that's kind of reinforced over and over again.
I think you're absolutely right. It really is reinforced. And what strikes me about that is that none of what you just spoke about is really all your responsibility. It often feels like a personal failing, right? But it's not. It's the response of our culture in medicine and the conditions that we train and work with every single day in our system that I think many of us think needs to be rethought and rebuilt at this point in time. So does that lead us to to this topic? Is this where trauma-informed care for physicians really starts?
You know, I think that's one component of it is our medical education, the medical culture in the system, and largely of that I think can be also reflected on American culture and values of what we think worth is, like efficiency, for example, productivity, right? Those are very deeply ingrained in American values that I think there is that overlap with the medical culture that shows up in different ways, particularly for physicians. I could go on and talk about some of those things, but within the context of, I think, medicine, having that worth tied to achievement, productivity, being competent, being reliable, if we're trained to have that early on with a positive external validation of seeking that from our colleagues or, in medical school, it's the people who grade us in residency, it's our faculty, right? And so when we graduate and become attendings, it becomes a system that we are working for. So whether that's, your admin, if you're an employed doctor, or just the healthcare system in general, I think there's that other layer of tied to that, and the layer of like identity fusion of being a physician, our productivity and our worth being tied to who we are. And I think that can become really scary for doctors when we talk about doing something different.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about how we talk about trauma-informed care for physicians or clinicians. We talk about it a lot as we are approaching our patients, particularly lately. I feel like it's something that's taught now in medical school. It's something that we teach our residents, um, though maybe not everywhere. Hopefully, it's becoming more common. How do we actually talk about it for physicians and other clinicians?
I think it's exactly the same way. We just really haven't talked about it in the context of ourselves. So it's easier to maybe start about, like, if we start talking to physicians, we know that if something traumatic happens, their nervous system will adapt to whatever that trauma is, right? Our autonomic nervous system will adapt. And then we start scanning the environment and start associating things that happened with that traumatic event to our day-to-day lives. Um, I think that, and we do that. That is a protective mechanism that we do and it's normal, right? So in the context of our patients, we know to ask for permission, to build that relationship, collaborate with shared decision making, and really meet them where they're at. So it's not like, what's wrong with you? It's asking what happened to you, right? What contributed to your current response and your current condition. And so when we look at it in the context of physicians, it is exactly the same. So I think for physicians, many behaviors that we see as quote unquote burnout or adaptive behaviors that we've had in response, in my opinion, it's response to our medical education and our culture, are actually those trauma and nervous system adaptations to their environment. So many of us are like, we become hypervigilant. We become um, anxious, our stress levels are high, and that's where we're operating at a constant flight or fight system every single day, right? Emotional containment, for example, or constant performance for others. We've just adapted to that because that's what we were brought up in. And so when you're looking at it through a trauma informed lens, like the 4 F's, for example, of trauma care, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, that can show up very differently for physicians, right? So, fight, we all know it's angry, people being irritable, bullying, snapping. Within the physician world, it could look like you maybe have a really angry response to a question in a meeting room because your brain has associated something from a past trauma to maybe something that person said, right? Or the idea of like, if this happened to me, like this is something I went through as a student, so that therefore you have to go through it too. I think that is very commonly seen in medicine. That, in my opinion, is also a type of trauma response.
It's so interesting that you say that. We are recording this right after some of the changes for the vaccine schedule, and I've seen
Mm.
some of these responses across social media. I'm sure that you have as well, and I feel like some of what you're talking about, some of the fight response, I think are correct responses, and also some of the way that some of it is coming out does feel in almost a traumatic response. It's in the, I can't believe we're being put in this situation, and the way that we're responding does seem to align with this. And I would say most of us do think that we're going through a trauma right now and how healthcare is changing, but it makes sense when you put it in that sense how we are all responding.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is also historical context of, and not to deviate too much specifically to vaccines, but understanding the historical context of why vaccines are put in place, I think is important and part of that. And again, goes with trauma informed care, right? Understanding the historical context of a physician's medical education and then an attendinghood and why they are responding to this way, I think gives us a lot of understanding and context, right? When you look at like the rest of the four F's, this is just, it's really fascinating to me. And this is why I love talking about it. We talked about fight, but flight, right? So that comes up as panic or worrying or rumination, perfectionism. So that can show up as like overworking or staying busy, not really pausing, right? The freeze, the third F, freeze, can show up as dissociation or numbness. So in a physician's life, that could look like, shutting down or feeling stuck, having decision fatigue at the end of the day that I see, a lot of my clients have. I think those are all very normal responses. And the last one is actually my favorite one to talk about because I think this is the one that's most prevalent that I see in my physician clients is fawning. And I think that can come out as people pleasing, over accommodating, like lack of boundaries is a huge one. I think we all struggle with that because um, we want the other person to be happy. We want patients to be happy and healthy. We want who we're working with for to be happy with us, right? But I think that can be really dangerous when you're taking responsibilities for others' emotions and responses rather than looking at your own emotional responses and how you feel. And that's a lot of the work that again I do with my clients.
It's so interesting because all of these responses are things that have helped us succeed to get to where
Yeah.
we are. But then we have to figure out how to manage them or unlearn them so that we don't continue to hurt ourselves in the process. And I agree with you. I think that we see these same things like the ruminating. If somebody has a patient outcome, regardless of whether they did something wrong or not, the ruminating is something that I often see people experience or feel like they just can't let go of. And then every patient interaction after that is related to it. And the people pleasing, like you said, absolutely. I work with boundaries a lot with people as well because I feel like that's often the first step in protecting ourselves. Um, but it's just so hard because those behaviors have gotten us to where we are, and we need to unlearn them so that we can stay well for ourselves and our families.
Yeah, and I think the rumination, it's interesting, and I am not an exception. There were many things that I ruminated over, and I think it's good to go back and look at, but it's also important to give equal airtime to all of the positive things because our natural brain and neural networks will focus on the negatives, and then that goes down a spiral. It's always interesting to ask, like, why this is happening, right? I think the rumination is like a push to do more of something. And anytime we have that idea of like, we have to do more of this so this doesn't happen next time, or we have to work harder or be more productive or more resilient so like this doesn't happen. I think we're often compensating for something, um, or avoiding feeling something, which perpetuates you down that cycle.
So, how do you work with people to push towards that more positive aspect so that you're giving that equal time and I'll say changing or improving your stress response?
I don't think it comes naturally. I think it takes a lot of intentional work and practice. And I think that shows up differently for every single person. For me in particular, it's processing the information. I think it starts with just acknowledgement and naming the emotion. I think that in and of itself can do a lot, provide relief. Um, and then asking the 5 whys is a coaching concept I love doing. So like, why is it that I was doing that? Why is it that I felt like this? Well, it's because of this. Well, why do I feel like this? Well, it's because of this. Right. And each layer of why I think digs down a little bit deeper until you get to that kind of core fear that we all have. And I think I mentioned before, one of my core fears always comes down to I'm not enough. So because this happened, because this happened, because this happened, because I didn't anticipate this, I'm not enough. So through a lot of coaching and practice, I, it's shifting from that to, I think, just self compassion and understanding. We provide so much of that to other people, and I just don't think we give enough of that to ourselves. So my practice now is one, acknowledgement, understanding the emotion, questioning why I'm feeling that. And then the automatic shift for me and my brain, at least, it's, well, of course I felt that way. Of course I felt that certain emotion because X, Y, and Z happened. Like that is normal. Unfortunately, things happen and it sucks, but it's okay. um, and like I said, it doesn't come naturally, but I think with a lot of practice, you start to develop that natural neural network of that shifts to have more immediate self compassion for yourself as time goes on.
As you've been doing this work and really looking at the different responses, can you tell me, has it shaped how you have looked at buzzwords like professionalism and resilience along the way?
It's interesting. I think yeah. So professionalism and resilience sound great on the outside, but I think it can be used very negatively when you start to look at how it's being used in academics. So this idea of resilience, I think physicians are penalized because they're not able to push through. They're quote unquote not resilient, right? I would say that's a very surface level. And I think, with this new generation of physicians, learners, there has been that shift of looking at what true resiliency looks like, what true sustainability in medicine looks like. And it is questioning a lot of the practices that we have continued to do and medical culture itself. So I think part of how we can create that change is also redefining some of these terms um, into meeting the physician where they're at. So instead of the idea of resiliency is what does sustainability look like for you? And that's not necessarily being expected to work, 40 plus hours a week for any faculty, a full-time faculty like yourself. That is um, it's almost it's unthinkable to actually work 40 hours a week. I think most full-time faculty are working probably way more than that. And so redefining what those expectations look like within ourselves and being able to have boundaries to adhere to those as a way to model change for others and for future generations of physicians.
It's definitely going to require some rethinking of our system to get there, but it is a laudable goal to try to get there. As you've been doing this work, is there something that you have realized along the way that you wish you would have learned sooner to help you understand yourself or those that you're working with better?
One of my earliest breakthroughs, I think, is knowing that I am responsible only for myself and my actions and how I feel. I am not responsible for anyone else's. um, I think continuing to remind myself that it was a huge relief when I first realized that. And continuing to remind myself that allows me to operate at a much, I would say, less anxious, less stress level on a day-to-day basis. And also know, I think the wisdom of knowing what I have control over and what I don't have control over also. Like I can show up and do the best that I can at work every day and all the various, you know, things that I do and not hold responsibility for the outcome of large systemic issues that might occur. And any mistake is not the result of one person. It is a result of many things that have fallen through the cracks, is what I've really firmly believed in. And so just embracing that completely, I think really, really helps my mental state.
Absolutely. That is a hard one. I will say you mentioned earlier that like we hold ourselves to really high expectations and we hold other people to those expectations too. I think that was one of the things that I had to learn early on was like you're saying you can't control the outcomes of other people, but also that you can't expect them to be perfect at all times. That was a hard lesson for me. Tell me a little bit about how reframing is helpful, particularly for physicians when you're thinking about trauma informed care for them.
Reframing it to, of course, this was my response because of something that has happened to me, is a way of providing that self-compassion and understanding. Um, that has been incredibly helpful for me and I think for others that I work with. I think it removes the judgment associated with like why isn't this done in the way that I wanted it to be done, or why isn't this done in a timely manner, why isn't it perfect, right? I think a lot of it also has to do with communication. I mean, no one is free from judgment because those are stories and thoughts in our head, where it's always going to be like that. But I think what is helpful is to recognize when it is coming out as judgment in your brain and for other people. Um, in in being in academics and medical education, I'm sure you know, I'm a huge proponent of nonviolent communication. And there are practices in there that differentiates between fact and um, like exactly what had happened. And that's fact, meaning if you look at a situation from a third person's perspective, you're just describing the facts and applying judgment to it. So most of our feedback, most of the thoughts in our head, the stories and what we say to people are actually judgments. And I think that's where there can be negative feelings associated with that. So if we move back and just present things as facts to ourselves, it is easy to interpret those facts negatively or reframe it in a positive manner. From my perspective, I think it's always helpful, and it's nice to step back and just look at the facts.
I think that's really interesting. One of the early communication coaches that I had really distinguished fact from story as part of her communication style. And so I do use that now in difficult conversations where I will say to people, this is what happened. This is, like you said, I'll lay out the facts as I know them. And I will say, I don't know if this is right or not, but the story that I'm telling myself in my head is this. And I will share sort of what the perception is so that they can see both sides, acknowledging that my perception might be completely wrong. It's been lovely because it gives people the opportunity to say, oh, yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Or, oh, no, that is absolutely not what my intention was or what I was hoping to have. Um,
It's a coaching concept too that I think is very helpful in communication. And I love the way you described that circumstance because I mean, it sounds like approaching these kinds of conversations with curiosity, like these are the facts. I'm wondering what happened. That's such a core concept in communication and feedback, like the R2C2 model, for example, of feedback. And really voicing this is my perception of things, I think is incredibly helpful for learners too, because that already you're saying, this is a judgment. These are the facts. This is my judgment. Tell me what you think about this and like what's wrong with that, because that might be totally different from your point of view.
Yeah, I have found it to be a real game changer for me as I have been going through difficult times with residents and faculty alike. It's really the word that I use that you said it is curiosity. I feel like when I can approach it with my curious hat on, it really shifts things, and it also allows other people to see that, like you said, we all do make judgment. None of us are free from it, but we can at least be aware of where it's happening.
Um, I love that we are doing it with others or learning to do it with others. And I think if we could have the practice of doing that more with ourselves, it would offer a lot of reframing and self compassion towards our own thoughts that precipitate, let's say, feelings like rumination or anxiety or stress or, self expectations, etc. Like I remember the question I always ask is like, how could I let that happen? Like, how could I let that mistake happen? Right? What can I do better next time? Versus just, and then that starts the rumination cycle versus nipping it in the bud of like looking at the facts. Okay, X, Y, and Z happened. And while understanding, of course, that happened because of X, Y, and Z. Okay, moving forward, now what can we do differently? And just having that self compassion and understanding towards ourselves really, I think, relieves a lot of self expectation and self judgment too, which oftentimes is worse than
Mhm.
the actual thing that had happened.
Right, and it helps decrease the shame that you feel based on that experience because you can see the patterns that happen to it, and maybe, hopefully, decreases the isolation also because then maybe it puts you in a better space to talk to someone else about it and not just yourself, or not just
Oh,
beating yourself
absolutely.
up, I should say.
Absolutely. I think talking about it, right? Initially we might be embarrassed if there is a mistake, and then there's this, we try to cover it up, and then it becomes shame, right? And I think talking about it and voicing it early on before it gets to that level, or even after it gets to that level, provides actually a lot of community and connection with others, because guaranteed you are not the only person that has ever experienced this or felt that. Anytime I bring up and talk about some of these things, almost everyone in the room has experienced it in one form or another, right? And then there is this relief and support, um, and this common connection and humanity that we've all have gone through this, and it is okay that we've all gone through this, and it's a way of also normalizing the experience, and the feelings that you have.
Absolutely. I feel like the isolation is some of the worst part of it, and so when we can carry that load together, it just makes it lighter and helps us find possible solutions for getting through it and ways to support each other.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my next question. Many of the people that are listening are leaders in medicine or educators in medicine. How do you recommend that educators and leaders think about this for their teams, whether it's talking to their teams about it or modeling it for them? Are there recommendations that you have?
I think for me, I think psychological safety for your team is incredibly important because it allows team members to dissent without feeling like there is repercussion or retribution. And so how can we create that psychological safety for our team members? I think approaching conversations with curiosity, like you mentioned, is incredibly important. There are certain like tactics, right? Like nonviolent communication is a favorite of mine that we could use to in order to do that in a non-judgmental manner. Um, Modeling, obviously, I think is a way of not voicing but showing others, and I think is actually more powerful than what actually comes out of our mouth, because when we see things model, like children, we see things model, we're more likely to accept it as real and the truth versus maybe somebody just saying it and them not actually seeing it as safe. It's interesting, there are so many other ways and tactics, right? Like 360 feedback or feedback through other various methods, like anonymously. But how we provide that dysregulation. So when you're looking at the nervous system in terms of trauma informed care, right? How we're able to create that environment, I think takes a lot of work and education, and being able to have these kinds of open conversations and connection, I think, as in relationship is, I think, a huge foundation in that. When you're looking at a lot of these feedback models that we talk about, having that relationship is the number one key when you're looking at trauma informed care for our patients. And it should be, I think, with the people that we work with also. So, how can we build that relationship? And then the next layer on top of it is when we're acting within that system, how can we create that psychological safety to allow others to feel empowered to do what it is, they've been hired to do, or what it is that they want to do within that system. I don't know that there is an easy or simple answer to that. And I think with every person in every system, it's going to be a little bit different. But I just try to keep all of those things in mind when I'm looking at working with others, like my colleagues or my learners, about ways I could support that. And just meeting people where they're at, really, I think is kind of the core key principles of trauma informed care.
Absolutely. And then I'll say the reverse of it. I think that one of the most important things that we can do in order to shift what we're doing, and for many of us, this will require a shift because it's not necessarily how we were trained. Are there leadership things or educational things that you see folks doing commonly that are um, that are negative, that are reinforcing some of the trauma that we need to be moving away from?
Yeah. Public shaming is definitely one that pops in my brain. Like, as a medical student, there were many instances, I think, what we would call like a toxic environment to be in. And so I think in large part, a lot of us have moved away from that, but not all. And a lot of people still train or think it's a way to help push individuals. But in my opinion, I just don't think that is an effective way to do it. So really providing feedback, I would say any kind of shaming feedback that can come off as that even really should be done in private. Unpredictable feedback, I think understanding where our learners are coming from. So feedback after night shift is probably not the best time, right? Knowing when to do it in a good timely manner, having like SMART goals, right? Achievable, being the emphasis of that. And oftentimes learners feel like from their perspective that those goalposts are moving. And so really asking why that is the case. Are we creating a system where we are allowing them for success, or are our expectations or systemic expectations just not realistic? I think addressing emotional responses to situations, processing emotional responses to situations. All of those things, I think, need to be more readily discussed, what physician well-being actually looks like, and not just, I would say, right, yoga, time off, all of those things are great. But in my opinion, almost a little superficial when we're not addressing the deeper reasons of why physicians are overworking or don't feel like they can take a break, right? A lot of that comes with dispelling expectations. And so a lot of that, I think, takes a lot of deeper discussions and work that I hope we're moving towards, but I wish more systems spent time talking about some of those things.
Great, thank you. If there's one thing that people take away from this conversation, what do you think the most important thing you want them to walk away with is?
I think we all became doctors because we want to help other people. I think medicine is very completely sustainable, and it takes a lot of work for us to protect our boundaries and ourselves to create that sustainability for ourselves, because no one else, like the system, the medical culture, your institution is um, has other priorities in mind, right? But I do think working together with what it looks like to have a sustainable career as physicians is very possible. And I hope that that's my takeaway, is that um, there are things that you can do for yourselves as a physician, including working with institutions, but it might not include that. And what does that ideal career look like for you within an institution or without? And I think that answer is going to look different for everyone. But the big takeaway message I want people to have is that medicine is sustainable and can be very sustainable for you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's so important. I think the fact that what is right for you is not necessarily what's right for the person next to you is so hard to realize, particularly when you're coming out of training. It looks like everybody's supposed to do the same thing. And I think we do a bad job of showing all of the variety that's out there. And then also that even for yourself, what's right for you today might not be right for you 5 or 10 years down the road is important too. I think we go through seasons of our lives and have to
Yeah,
adjust with that based on so many different factors. And so reevaluating that can always be very helpful.
agreed. 100% agree.
So I know that you think that a safe community is really important in lightening the load and specifically being witnessed without performing. And I know that you create spaces for this. And so I was hoping you can share a little bit about those spaces and who they're designed for.
Yeah. Of course, I do physician coaching, one-on-one physician coaching for all physicians. I particularly love coaching early career physicians. I love the advocacy and mentorship involved with that. Part of that is also creating that sustainability in the long run, right? Of if we can dispel these expectations early on in your early career, that it hopefully helps you achieve a better sustainability later on. um, I have also created in-person workshops where we teach physicians practical tools. A lot of them are EMDR inspired exercises of way to deactivate your nervous system, either in the moment or after, when you do become dysregulated. And what dysregulation looks like are those 4 F's that we talked about. And so during those in-person workshops, we actually go through some of these exercises and talk how we can use them very practically in real time and in the moment, and what that can look like. Um, Along with group coaching also. And then the last way is my retreat. It is called Redefining Joy in Medicine, which is a trauma informed wellness retreat for women physicians. It will be in May of 2026 in Arizona. And I think it's just, again, providing the platform for physicians to come together, dispel those expectations, and create that shared community and understanding and support for one another of things that they have gone through and carried and continue to carry. And we'll spend some of that time also digging deep on things that you can bring back with you and practice with you in your day-to-day life. I personally, the retreats that I have gone to have been completely life changing, not just from what we talk about, but really it's that shared support with other women physicians and other physicians. And that community that you talked about. And so those are the I would say core reasons why I'm creating some of these spaces, is to provide opportunities for doctors to come together and receive that shared community and support.
Thank you so much for sharing that. All of those experiences sound absolutely crucial for helping feel the support that we're all facing in this difficult journey. Um, is there anything else that you want to share today?
I mean, there are so many other things. I could probably continue talking, but again, I think the core reason of why I'm doing all of this, why I think physician wellness is so important, is because of that sustainability. The health care system has evolved, and I don't know that our medical culture and the way that we have practice has evolved with that to um, not necessarily complement the way the healthcare system has evolved into, but as a way to provide sustainability for us so we can continue practicing medicine in the system. Um, but I think with advocacy work, both on, let's say, a systemic level, and then I would say coaching is very much an individual advocacy work on yourself. I think those hand in hand, we can start to create some of these cultural changes that make it more sustainable for doctors and for us and other doctors in the future too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was a lovely conversation, and it was just wonderful to talk with you today.
It's been so wonderful. I really appreciate how this conversation has been grounded and validating, and honestly, we just need to have this conversation so much more. We need to remember,
Yeah.
like you said earlier, that we need to approach everyone where they are and need to remember the trauma that we have all experienced and approach each other as we are talking about approaching our patients as well. For everyone who is listening, we will link all of Cynthia's information in the show notes so you can find out more about her coaching and her retreats and healing circles if you are local. And if this episode resonated, then I would invite you to reflect not just on your own nervous system, but on the environments that you are creating for others and if you're creating safe spaces for them as well. I really believe that trauma-informed care for physicians is not optional if we want to continue to have a possibility of sustainability within medicine. It really does need to be foundational. So thank you for listening. And don't forget that you can get free continuing education credits from this episode. You will see the link and the Learn on Pinnacle app in the notes as well. And I will see you next time where we are going to talk about loneliness in medicine.
Thanks for joining me on The Hidden Load. Tag me on Instagram at Dr. Tina Wheat or email me at santina@santinawheat.com with your takeaways and ideas. Don't forget to subscribe, and until next time, let's lighten your hidden load.